Hi everyone, this is Trevor from astrobackyard.com, and in this video I'm going to walk you through an easy Milky Way processing tutorial using Adobe Photoshop. The images were captured using this exact little portable astrophotography rig here. This is the Ioptron Sky Tracker Pro. It's a portable tracking mount with a ball head here, and then the Canon Rebel T3i DSLR. The lens used is a Rokinon 14mm f2.8, so very fast and wide angle. Man, this rig's been put through the ringer. There's dings and scratches all over it, but it's just the way I like it. Before we get into it here, I just want to cover the software tools I'll be using for this tutorial. Adobe Photoshop, of course, Adobe Bridge to review the individual image files, and then in Photoshop I'll be using some plugins, some action sets actually. The Astronomy Tools action set from Pro Digital Software, so that allows you to play a series of actions to run some effects on our photo. And then I'll be using an action set from photographingspace.com. They make some really great ones for Milky Way image processing specifically. And then what else? Oh, to get our final image that we're going to actually process in Photoshop, we'll use Deep Sky Stacker, which registers and aligns all the images together for an image with better signal to noise ratio that we can actually process. And Deep Sky Stacker is free. So that's great. Just Google Deep Sky Stacker, you should find that. Okay, with that out of the way, let's hop onto the computer. Okay, here we go. We're in Adobe Bridge. This is the part of the Adobe Creative Suite, and I really enjoy using it for reviewing images before stacking them. My DSLR images, that is. So these are the image frames straight out of the camera from my dark sky site, which was the Cherry Springs Star Party in 2018. Just an incredible night. So this is kind of the field of view you can get with a crop sensor DSLR and the Rokinon 14mm f2.8 lens. A lot of people ask me what's the star quality through this lens, specifically at the edges. So here's kind of what they look like. They're just, they're starting to get a little oblong at the edges, but really not too bad considering how wide of a field of view this is. With a full frame camera, yeah, they'd be a lot more stretched around the edges, but I mean, there's a few ways around that. You can crop the image in a little bit. In the center, they're nice and sharp. So these are 2-minute exposures at ISO 1600, and I actually use the lens at f3.2 because it's just a little bit sharper than it would be at f2.8. So obviously these are tracked shots, and it was well polar aligned on the Ioptron Sky Tracker Pro, and that's why these stars are in fact sharp over a 2-minute exposure. And actually, if I cruise through these images here, you can see the rotation of the Earth, and the tree lines slowly disappear as the tracker follows the sky and it gets away from the Earth. Pretty cool. So this folder here of 2-minute subs are all the good images. So they're the ones that didn't have a plane going by or me kind of reframing or a satellite trail. These are all the images here, and then I just kind of sorted the best ones into a folder. So let's see. So here they are here. So these are the files that we're going to stack together and register in Deep Sky Stacker to create an image with a healthy signal to noise ratio that we can then process in Adobe Photoshop. So let's bring these into Deep Sky Stacker now. One last thing I forgot to mention is that the camera had a filter in it, a light pollution filter. Didn't really need it here, but it does include an IR cut filter. This is a modified DSLR that had this stock Canon IR cut filter removed, which allows some more of the reds from the night sky to actually pass through onto the sensor. And the filter I used was an IDIS LPS I believe it's the D2 filter. This one's a few years old, but it's just, I like this filter because it does reduce light pollution if there is any, while retaining some of the natural star colors. Although, I mean, these images are a little purple and pink. Like, this is with auto white balance straight out of the camera. So if you're wondering, it's like, why do they look kind of red or purple? That's just a result of my modified camera and the filter I happen to use. But we'll balance all that out later. So let's go into Deep Sky Stacker here, which you can download for free online. Just Google Deep Sky Stacker. There's so many ways to stack and register and process images now, and I feel like Deep Sky Stacker is kind of falling behind because it's the old school free version, but I still love it, and until it stops working for me, I'm going to stick with it. So this is Deep Sky Stacker 4.1.0. It looks like there's a new version available. After many years, they finally came up with an update, which is really cool. So let's just open up our picture files, and it's going to default to the last imaging session I did here, which was M17 from the backyard. But let's go back to the Milky Way on June 15th. So this is my folder of all my good images. You don't want to, at this stage, you don't want to be in Deep Sky Stacker, going through and sorting your images here in this in the menu here. So I like to pre-sort them with a real good view in Bridge first, and then you know that you can select them all. So we just went to open picture files. These are our light frames. These are all 2-minute subs. The data here shows us when it was taken, the size, the ISO, the exposure length. So again, all 2-minute exposures. Don't worry about how they look like here in the preview. Sometimes you have to toggle this slider up here to kind of get a good look at things, but it doesn't change the actual image that it spits out in the end. Now, if you've seen any of my tutorials before, you'll know that I take dark frames and you subtract dark frames from your image, which helps reduce noise. It's particularly effective when shooting DSLR astrophotography. And what it is just a 2-minute exposure through the camera that I took on the same night with the same temperature with the lens cap on. So it's just kind of reading what that dark thermal current is in the camera, the thermal noise. So in that same folder, I'll have my dark files. Actually, I didn't separate them into the good folder, but I know this series of black frames that are all 2 minutes long at the end of my session are my darks. And we can confirm that in Deep Sky Stacker. So you usually only need about 10 to 15 of them. Any more than that's really unnecessary. So how many did we get here? Dark frames 12, that should be more than enough. So it still says 0 light frames here. That's just because we need to check all. So now we can see we have 64 light frames and 12 dark frames. And then this category here shows the lights and the darks. If we want to check, so these are darks, and if we preview them, see the exposure length, we got a 3-second and a 1-second here. We'll just remove those from the list. So I actually have 10 darks. That should work just fine though. So there's our darks. The last dark here, 2 minutes, and then our lights. So same ISO speed for the darks as well. Now you can, when you're in light polluted skies, like if I was doing anything DSLR wise from the backyard, you really need to subtract flat frames as well. That helps with gradients, but because these were truly dark skies with little to 0 light pollution, we're not going to have those gradient issues, so we can get away without doing flats, which was nice because flats can be a bit of a process when you're out camping. So the next step here is we're going to register and stack these images. Now that we've checked them all off here, we can click on Register Checked Pictures. I always do. I click Register Already Registered Pictures. I'm not sure if it needs to be done, but I always do it. This is important here, the star detection threshold. So I have it set to 2% because I had a really dim narrowband image I was working on last time. But for something like this, we can save a lot of time by bumping it way up to, let's say, 50%, and I'm going to compute the number of stars. This is just going to tell me how many stars Deep Sky Stacker reads in the image. So 114 stars, that's a little low. We want a few more than that, so I'll just change that to 45%. 151, that's a perfect amount. So what this is doing is that it's reading the number of stars it's going to use to register the images, which is basically align them all on top of each other, which subtracts noise because the signal carries through on each image, whereas the noise, which is the random pixels, will cancel out as they get layered on top of each other. How's that for a description of signal to noise ratio in true Astro Backyard fashion? So 45% here, we're going to say okay. This yellow here would turn green if we added bias and flat frames, which we don't need to get into here. Lights and darks will work just fine. And then I'm just going to hit OK. Now we've got the default recommended settings here, which if you're using a color camera in a Milky Way photo will work just fine. That's the default stacking methods. Here we go. So stacking mode standard. Alignment mode automatic. We're stacking 64 frames at ISO 1600 for a grand total of 2 hours and 6 minutes. Now this will take a bit of time, so I'm just going to run this and then I will catch back up with you and we'll look at the picture that Deep Sky Stacker spits out for us. Okay, so we're in the folder that I store my the images that Deep Sky Stacker spits out. I call it the Deep Sky Stacker space folder, and then you'll find an autosave file of your image here. I've done a few since then, but here's the Milky Way photo with all our good data. It's a big file, 176 megabytes. So we'll open this up, and it looks rather dull at this point, but there's some really great data in here. So we're going to turn this into this after all the processing that we do. First thing we'll do is just a little crop, and this is just to get rid of the outer edges where there's some stacking artifacts. See this, this hard dark line here? That's just from the edges of the frame kind of, aligning together and shifting around slightly. So we'll just crop it in just a little bit because we don't want to see any of those dark details on the histogram. So we've cropped it a little bit, and now we're going to actually look at the levels, which are, there's not a whole lot we can do here. It's actually pulling in a lot of this black data here from the trees that we've stacked on top of each other into a blob. So if this image didn't include that, it would make a more natural looking histogram, and it would actually make it easier to process, but this is where we're at. So from here we will go to image mode and switch it from a 32-bit mode to 16-bit. And this will give us expanded options for processing. The mode here is you just exposure and gamma. Don't use any of the other modes here, local adaptation, and definitely don't play with any of these HDR toning settings, as tempting as it may be. Just go to exposure and gamma. We're just simply converting it to a 16-bit image. Now we can look at the levels, and the histogram has changed a little bit. This little hump here is the black data over here. So we can just skip over that and pull right into the edge of the real mountain here, which is this is the Milky Way image data all here. So it's looking rather dark, so let's use curves to make our initial stretch, which will go a long way. So in layer, new adjustment layer, curves, just call it curves 1, and we'll just do a standard non-linear curve stretch. Which will pull out a lot of the details, and you just want to make sure that you're not hitting the roof of the histogram here. You may want to pull this portion of the curve slider into to create that S curve, which will create more contrast. I think we'll just leave it about there. I'm happy with that for now. We can just close this, and because it's a new adjustment layer, we can go before and after we've made that change. At this point, I like to use the keyboard command on a PC. I'm not sure what it is on a Mac, so I'm sorry. I'm sure there is one. Control Shift Alt N plus E. It just creates a new merged layer of everything on top. So this one will give us an accurate histogram of what we're looking at. So here we are with the curves. Now on this layer, I'm going to do an even more aggressive curve stretch. This time isolated to just the areas that I want to bring forward, and not the ones that I don't. So we'll just go to curves, and then if I hold down the control key, you see I have this little eyedropper here. I can actually pick a dark part of the image, so I just pick some black sky here and clicked, and it's plotted that point on the histogram here. And now I will pull, I'm actually going to pull maybe some of this, like the star glow from the Milky Way here, in this kind of yellowy section. And it's plotted that point over here. I'm pointing at the screen as if you can see that. So then I'm going to pull here, which is very powerful because it's only pulling up the bright spots that I want to pull out and kind of leaving the dark spots alone. It's not pulling up everything universally. And then you can kind of pull down the dark spots and pull up the bright spots. You don't want to go too aggressive, but it's really a matter of taste here. So as you can see from where we're at, we've really got things really bright. That was perhaps a little too aggressive. So as I like to do, I'm just going to put that layer at 66% opacity. And then I'm going to use that same method for merging a new layer on top. And we're going to work with this layer. Alright, at this point, the way I feel about this image is these stars are just really, really bright. So we're going to use our first action now, which is going to dim those stars and pull forward some of the details in the Milky Way. But before that, we're just going to do it's a pretty basic action called local contrast enhancement. Now, this is the Astronomy Tools version 1.6 action set, which I highly recommend. We are on this new layer that I've created, new merge layer, so we can always go back. And I'm just going to run local contrast enhancement. The default settings for this is pretty aggressive. I would say too aggressive, and you'll see what I mean in a moment. It's just doing its thing. So pretty powerful, but it's a little aggressive if you ask me. So I'm just going to turn this down using the same method before. I might actually just do 33% this time. So a subtle but noticeable difference. For the sake of this tutorial, just so that the actions don't take forever, I'm going to flatten the image, which means we won't be able to go back. Any previous step that I've went to here is just going to be the single background file, but normally you'd want to keep all those layers open so you can go back and take your time. Another thing I'm going to do just for the sake of speed is sometimes these actions can take a while depending on the power of your machine, but you can speed a lot of that up by reducing the image size overall. So I'm reducing this to almost half the size, which will speed things up because it's less of a huge image file. But you wouldn't want to do that if you're going to print out a really high resolution image, or you want a high resolution image to share online. You want to keep it at full size. It'll just take longer to process in terms of time needed for the actions to run. So I did that preemptively because I know the next action I'm going to take notoriously takes a long time, and it's called Enhance DSO and Reduce Stars. Probably the single most powerful action in the set, and definitely my favorite. So I'm going to run that just on my the background image file here. And another way of going backwards, if you don't like the action you just applied, you can go copy the latest version of the image, select the whole canvas, copy it, and then go back into the history before the action happened. There's the history states feature in Photoshop, and then you can just paste the new version on top and then apply the opacity to taste. So yeah, even with this reduced image size, it does take a bit of time to run, and you can hear my or maybe you can't hear it, but I can hear it, that my computer fan is just really humming away because it's taxing on the system. It's actually I could help that a little bit by closing Bridge, which uses quite a bit of memory. So Bridge is closed. Deep Sky Stacker doesn't use much, but I will close that as well. So this action has completed. It probably took about 2.5 minutes total. And if we want to see the before and after, you can probably already tell what that does. It's so powerful. I'm just going to select the canvas, copy it, and then, like I said, go back into the history state before it happened. So there's the before, and I'll paste it on top. There's the after. So enhance DSO and reduce stars. It really does dim out the bright stars nicely, and it just separates the DSOs from a starry sky. Like, I couldn't see this nebulosity before I ran the action. It was really hidden in here, but now it stands out. It's a really nice and a powerful effect. Now with this version, this new layer, I'm going to do another very slight tweak, curves tweak, and again I'll use that method of holding down control and selecting a dark area and a bright area to pull forward. So I'll select my dark area first. I just some real dark dust here in the Milky Way, and then I'm just going to grab some of the pink in the Eagle Nebula here, and I'm going to pull that forward a little bit. It's getting a little bright and blown out here, and I mean, it is a very bright area, but we don't want it too bright. So this is going to be, quite a subtle stretch. The other thing to note here is that it really depends on the monitor you're using too. The screen on my laptop I'm using here to process is so bright, so everything tends to look just crazy bright on here. And then sometimes when I move it onto my other monitor, it's half the brightness and it looks rather dim. So if you have a dual monitor setup, I would suggest having them at different brightnesses, and you can kind of find a balance between the two of them, because when you're sharing the images, if someone's on a dim screen, an image you process that looks nice and bright and vibrant might not look so great on their screen. So if you kind of find a happy medium, your photo will appear best on a variety of screens. So I think I'll keep that, but I'll do my 66% trick again. So now when I'm looking at this image, the stars have been tamed. I'm just going to create another layer on top. I want to dim them just a little bit more. I want to shrink them, if you will. So there's a couple ways to do this. We'll use the manual method. This doesn't use an action. It can be really powerful, especially for deep sky astrophotography. So we're going to do select color range, and we'll do highlights. So if you can see this little preview here, it's picking out the highlights, and the range here will start pulling in the bright areas of the Milky Way. We don't want that. We just want the brightest stars. So I think if we choose it around there, play with the fuzziness. So if you can see the stars it's selected here, it hasn't quite made it around all of them, and it is pulling in these areas here. So with that kind of result, I'll just, for experiment's sake, I'll show you what I would do here. Is you go to Other, Minimum, and now you can see in the preview, look at it just removes the stars. So that obviously right here is not a desired effect. It's like missing gaps where the stars were with little holes. So you don't want to do that. But surprisingly, if you did keep this layer and just did it really subtly, like let's do 33%, it's not such a bad effect. It just kind of dims the stars a little bit. So even when you do it, a very rudimentary task like that, and you just do it very basically, if you do turn it down, it's not such a bad effect. I may actually keep that. Kind of look at it from all views here. Yeah, I'll keep that. So 33%. New layer on top here. All right. We're going to do one more star reduction method because it's really powerful. We may not keep it depending on how it looks, or we may just tone it right down. If you find my processing tutorials like a little bit loose, I actually think it's beneficial for you, because I like to play with the images. I experiment, and that's really one of my favorite parts of astrophotography. So by me telling you, okay, adjust this slider and set it to 68, and just follow step by step like that, I don't know how much value there is in that if you're following steps and you don't really know why you're doing it. So I prefer the style of processing where, okay, try this, how does that look, adjust it, adjust the strength of it, and kind of keep your eye on the overall image and what you're going for. I think that's a better way to, and a more enjoyable way to approach processing astrophotography. This dull image is starting to get to me. I can't wait to do the saturation boost, which is coming up very soon. I just wanted to show you one more star reduction technique, which is in the Astronomy Tools action set here called Make Stars Smaller, and it really is that easy. I just want to make sure I'm on my 100% opacity layer here, and we'll run that one. Now this one works really well. The only trouble is that it will sometimes affect your actual deep sky object in the field and kind of, you know, lose some sharpness in that and kind of take away from it. So if we look at what it's done in terms of reducing stars, great job. If we actually go in and see what it's doing to, say, the Eagle Nebula here, it's definitely, you know, reduced it, dimmed it a bit, and unsharpened it. So why don't we just do a very, very subtle 15%, just to say we ran the action. Again, I'm going to just flatten this entire image, which is a destructive workflow. You certainly don't want to do that. You can, you know, save your Photoshop files along the way so you can go back. You know, if you're putting in 2 hours into an image doing processing steps, that's a lot of work, and you don't want to have to start from scratch each time. So if you save it in stages, you can go back and, you know, save the file as levels tweak, curves tweak, saturation boost, and then just go back to it and make adjustments. You know, it doesn't take long to fill up your hard drive full of large Photoshop files doing that, but yeah, that's a non-destructive workflow. Okay, so now we're going to do the saturation boost like I mentioned. So the way we're going to do that is to do a new layer, new adjustment layer, and vibrance. Now this will give us the vibrance and saturation sliders. And if we move up this saturation, look at those beautiful colors it's putting into the Milky Way, the browns of the dust, and it really does pull out the natural color. I mean, you can certainly overdo it, but this is actually what the Milky Way should look like, with the very pink and magenta nebulosity. So we're going to go quite aggressive on this because, in my eyes, that's what a really beautiful Milky Way photo should look like. Vibrance, the same thing. It does do a slightly different job than saturation does, but we'll go quite aggressive on that as well. Close this down and look at the before and after. So not only does it actually add the color and the emission nebulae here in the Milky Way, but it also increases the color of these beautiful stars. You can see Antares here, that bright orange, and that's just a thing of beauty there. Okay, so why don't we put that again at 66%. Huge improvement. I wouldn't say we're overdoing it. New layer on top. And now we can do some selective saturation boosts. So if, again, using select color range, we'll use the eyedropper here and do sampled colors, and we'll just pull the pink from the Eagle Nebula, and it's gonna not only pull the pink from that Eagle Nebula, but all those hues. So here's the lagoon down here and the cat's paw, and we're gonna selectively boost the saturation of those colors in the image. Really powerful stuff. So a new adjustment layer, vibrance again, and if we move this slider, you should see, and you can really overdo it here, you're just boosting the color of those objects. Very, very subtle. It would be nice to get some of the blues. This is the Trifid Nebula there. But I think you get the idea. And this nebulosity here is also gotten a little bit stronger from that. So those are the ways I kind of boost the color and saturation of a Milky Way image like this. All right, new layer on top. I think we could actually do another curve stretch here. But let's look at the actions. It might be a good idea to do that local contrast enhancement again at this stage after we've pulled out those colors and reduced the stars. That will get some of that will sharpen up some of the dark dust in the Milky Way. I've seen a lot of guys have share an image like this, and it's very cool to see that aggressive, dark, contrasty dust. But to me, it starts to look a little unreal, so I prefer to go much more subtle with that. Again, 33%. And I'm going to flatten the image. And we're getting closer and closer to a final shareable image here. So this is where it gets really fun, when you're kind of putting the finishing touches on your image. We'll go to the photographing space action set here. And one of the ones I really like is Clara Sky. It's similar to the local contrast enhancement. And you'll see here, so I just ran Clara Sky 5. The before and after, really powerful stuff. It really makes it pop. Pretty aggressive there, so we'll do the old 33% technique, which makes a nice difference, I think. I'm going to create a new layer on top. I think I'm just going to do another overall saturation boost. This one will be 9 and 9. Pretty colorful, that's okay, and we're getting a little yellow as we get closer to the horizon here, but that's okay. It's kind of the look I'm going for. Another action we're going to run here from the photographing space pack is mini stars, another star reduction, and we're just going to run this. It's very subtle, but it's one of the single biggest hacks for creating a really beautiful Milky Way photo, is just taming those stars. Perhaps went a little too strong there. We'll do 66%, but it really makes a big difference. You can really start to see the dust lanes and the nebulosity when you tame those bright stars. I'm going to flatten this here, and there's not a whole lot of noise in this image because we do have over 2 hours of integrated exposure time, but I really like the noise reduction actions from this action pack. So that just kind of smooths everything out. I don't want to lose too much sharpness, so I'm going to turn it down just a little bit, but it definitely removes some of the crunchiness, and then we can sharpen it again after. So I'll just flatten it at this stage, and then something I do, because I prefer my images to look a little cooler, and it's not for everyone, on the color spectrum I mean when I say cooler, and I'll put this cooling filter over top of it. I've done this before. I think that looks pretty cool like that, but we're going to actually just do 11% for a more natural look. And now this is really what this is the way I like to kind of see this. It's the sky's a little less brown, a little more cool, and then the reds are a little less orangey red and more like purple, a little more natural. Maybe it's just my way of compensating for the look that a stock camera kind of provides as opposed to a modified one, kind of the best of both worlds. We're just putting the very final finishing touches on this now. Just for fun, I'll go into the curves again, pick a bright spot, pick a dark spot, and just see if we can actually do anything to just really make this pop. That slight S-curve, really impactful. It's very dramatic, but you just want to be, you don't want to go overboard here. So I'm just going to paste what I just did as a new layer, turn it down a little bit, and as you know, that's a very common way I process. Okay, we're very, very close to a final image here. I might just do one last little vibrance and saturation, 5 and 5, get that full color, and yeah, this is looking really good. So I'm not sure how you feel about how this image looks. If it was to your taste, probably not. Let's see how close it was. Wow, quite a bit different from my last process. Much less cool and more brown, get some more of those yellows. So sometimes it's fun to do when you do have two variations of an image. Let's see how big this one is. 24. Okay, so I can scale it down. You combine the two and kind of get the midway point. So I just pasted the version I processed on top of my last one, and we're just going to line that up using the free transform tool. Stars make great registration points, so it's actually quite easy to line it up. It makes it harder when the images aren't the same scale because you've got two elements to deal with, but using the arrow keys, you can usually line things up pretty well. And you just don't want to go backwards. So once you've scaled the image down, you don't want to go back up again, because you'll lose. If you've applied it and then tried to stretch back up, you're actually losing resolution. There we go. So there's the new version on top of the old version. And let's see if I just do this. Yeah, I think it may be an improvement overall, kind of both images together. And here we are. This is the final image of the Milky Way. I hope you enjoyed that tutorial, and most importantly, I hope you learned the style that I like to process my images. It's a very creative, artistic, fun way. I think it's better to kind of know what each step does, and then you kind of move in the right direction throughout your image until you land on something you're happy with. And then when you know what each element does as you do it, you have much more control in achieving the end final image that you're looking for, as opposed to following a tutorial where it's just, like I said, apply this at 60%, now set this to 17. Like, you're really not understanding what's happening there. So it's a more creative, free-flowing way to process images. My GoPro just ran out of. So I hope you enjoy the tutorial, and subscribe for more videos. I'm going to be talking more about equipment, some more travel vlogs, some more tutorials just like this one. And most importantly, I really hope you enjoy the hobby of astrophotography. There's nothing else like it. So all the best and clear skies. Thank you so much for watching this all the way to the end. I really appreciate it, and all the amazing comments you guys give me. So clear skies, everyone. Thanks.